kings. And so when Yusuf alayhi salam goes to Egypt, we have to look for that period of history when there were kings in Egypt, not pharaohs. When we do that, we find the pharaohs are all Egyptian. But there was a period of time when a non-Egyptian people, called the Hyksos, they invaded Egypt, and they were able to conquer and colonize part of Egypt, not the whole of Egypt. Part of Egypt from the Red Sea to the River Nile, which is known as the Eastern Delta, not the airline, Eastern Delta. Delta, because when the River Nile overflows its banks, then this entire area gets the rich silt, and so it becomes very fertile for agriculture. It becomes the breadbasket. So this is the Eastern Delta from the Red Sea to the River Nile, and it is this area which is colonized, occupied and colonized by a non-Egyptian people called the Hyksos. And they were known as kings, not pharaohs. And Yusuf alayhi salam becomes prime minister. Okay, Banu Israel live in this territory for some 420 years, but were enslaved. And by the time of Musa alayhi salam, they are slaves in Egypt. My question, who enslaved them and why were they enslaved? Don't look so worried. Either you know the answer, you don't know. Yes. They were enslaved as punishment. Punishment for what? Punishment for not living? For leaving the Holy Land. Yes? Go ahead. Why were Banu Israel enslaved in Egypt? Yes, Hassan, you have an answer? You're smiling? Yes? Come on. Because they are migrants from outside. Anybody else? Nobody. Okay. The Egyptians hated the invaders who came from out of Egypt and ruled over that part of Egypt which is known as the Eastern Delta. They hated the Hyksos, and they adored their own leaders who were the pharaohs. Indeed, they worshipped their leaders, the pharaohs, as gods. And so when the pharaohs finally succeeded in defeating the Hyksos and driving them back out of Egypt, Banu Israel, who had a privileged position under the Hyksos, they lived in a privileged position. They were now punished. Punished for supporting the enemy. That is why they were enslaved. Yes. Okay. Which enemy were Banu Israel supporting? Who can answer that? I just told you. The Hyksos. The Hyksos. The Hyksos were not Egyptians. They came from outside of Egypt and they invaded the Eastern Delta, they conquered it and they colonized it and they ruled over it. While they were ruling over it, Yusuf alayhi salam came. And then after Yusuf alayhi salam was made prime minister, then Yaqub alayhi salam and the whole family came. And the Hyksos now gave Banu Israel a very high status in society. And so when the pharaohs succeeded in defeating the Hyksos and driving them out, Banu Israel are now punished for having supported the enemies of Egypt. Okay? All right. What is the name that the Quran gives to that territory where Banu Israel lived? The Hyksos ruled over it, the eastern delta. The Quran gives a particular name to that territory which is crucial to the understanding of Ashura. What is the name? Anybody? Huh? Hadiyah. Madian. No, Madian is on that side, the Sinai Peninsula, Madian. The answer is Mim, Sod, Ra, Misr. Mim, Sod, Ra, Misr. Today, the word Misr stands for the whole of Egypt. You're going to Misr. And when someone is an Egyptian, he is known as Misri, Egyptian. But for the Quran, no. Misr is only that part of Egypt over which the Hyksos ruled and which is now known as the Eastern Delta. Good. When the time came for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to raise Musa alayhi salam and to send him to Fir'aun, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent him with signs. And these signs would impact upon Egypt, and they were meant to wake them up, to get them to accept that the message of Musa alayhi salam was the truth. The truth. And that the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, release Banu Israel, allow them to leave, must be obeyed. The first sign, everybody knows it, so I don't have to ask you. Take your rod and throw it on the ground, Musa alayhi salam, and it will become a snake. All right. Now go on, hold the tail of the snake. Don't be afraid. Come on, hold it. Of course he's afraid. But when he holds it, then the snake becomes a rod. A rod, not another snake. It's a rod. That was sign number one. How many signs were there in all? Anybody? 2. Who said 9? 9. How many signs were there in all? The Quran mentions how many signs in all? Come on. We have 2 answers. 3. Who says 3? 3. Are you guessing or? I have a student of mine who has a PhD in sophisticated guesswork, you know. He's guessing and you would think that he's very, very confident. Any other answers? My question is, how many signs does the Quran mention Musa alayhi salam was sent with to Fir'aun? Name. How many? 9 is correct. 9 is correct. Now here is the evidence for you that you have been negligent in your study of the Quran. There's evidence staring you in your faces here tonight. Okay? Now, number 1 was, I don't think I can remember all 9, but let's try. Maybe you can help me. Number 1 was the rod. It became a stick. Number 2, anybody? Put your hand underneath your arm. Now take it out. And it becomes white, gleaming white, gleaming white, but the hand is not in any way diseased or deformed or anything.